I'm Roy Harriman, and we have a challenging and very important topic today. And fortunately, we have a guest who is up to the challenge, and that is Mark Warren, Executive Vice President of Strategos International. Mark, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Roy. Thank you.
What we're going to talk about today is responding to criticisms of school active shooter training. So school's been back in session for a while now, but as the year started, there was a lot of active shooter training, and that's a good thing. It's becoming more prominent. And with it becoming more prominent, there have been criticisms raised, and some of the criticisms are growing more and more heightened. Just a few of these, and we'll talk about them, are that students, even young children, are included in the training, and they're traumatized as a result. Second one is that some drills are heavy-handed. Infamously, and we'll talk about this, in Indiana last year, some teachers were reportedly shot with plastic pellets in a mock execution, but it left welts and it drew blood. Beyond anything like this, some teachers complain just simply of being traumatized by any active shooter training. I would say that has to be a minority, but they're there. And then a final complaint, perhaps the toughest criticism, is that the claim that there is no evidence that the drills are effective. So let's jump right in. Mark, Strategos is in a unique position to address some of these concerns because Strategos is not any kind of a newcomer to school active shooter training. In fact, your company started in 2002, and your training does not include the students. Your training is for the teachers. So let's start there. Why are there no students in your school active shooter training?
Well, it's a great question. The reality for us when we really started developing our program, one of the first things we understood and reasoned was that young people don't typically have a sense of mortality. They don't really know what's dangerous to them. I mean, hence you see in the X Games 17 and 18-year-old people doing backflips on motorcycles, at 50 feet in the air. As an adult, we have a better sense of mortality. We understand risk. And so the big fear is when you train students that they may take a correct action at the wrong time. They may be secured in a locked area and decide we're going to go after this guy. We're going to take it to him. As an example, sometimes in our training, we use videotape of Caitlin Roig from Sandy Hook. And she had her 15 students barricaded into a bathroom. And one of the young boys, 7 years old, said, "I know karate. I'll lead us out of here." So he had been trained in some martial arts, which was really just sport technique at that point, not truly a fighting technique. And how is he going to go against somebody that may be armed that's better prepared for that than him? So it's an unrealistic reality. So we just don't feel right now that students need to be trained. Now, once we start getting up into the college, university level, they're young adults. They're going to be responsible for their own actions. Whereas in a school environment, it's more controlled, and we expect the teachers to be trained on how to properly tell somebody what they need to do when they need to do it.
Now, that makes perfect sense. Students don't have necessarily good judgment. I can speak personally to when I was a student. And so, yeah, the last person that you would want leading a charge down the hallway would have been me when I was, 16. So that makes perfect sense.
Well, Mark, if I can kind of follow up just a little bit
please.
on that, there's a lot of things. Just look at some of the YouTube videos that are out there, some of the things that youth are doing that's completely, you're going, this could easily kill you. What are you doing? And they just don't have that recognition. But at the same time, I can show you many examples of incidents that actually students did intervene and stop the ongoing killing. So it's not necessarily that they're not capable. It's just that do we feel that it's a necessity right now at this time? And for us as a company, we just have not felt that's the need. Schools are still really far behind in their response protocols. So just getting the teachers, faculty, and staff and other adults in the school properly trained has been our focus at this point.
And let's talk about training. So one of the complaints that we talked about earlier that have been registered was one is that the training unnecessarily traumatizes students and children. Well, you've really taken that part out of the equation.
Correct.
But others have complained about that it's just the training is scary. It causes anxiety, which, I mean, I think no one would say that's untrue. But isn't the point of the training to induce some stress that results in a positive outcome?
Correct. You know, lacking training, I use a saying all the time, the body can't go where the brain's never been. And that is the problem in a crisis where you're talking about what your response looks like in a crisis. It's completely different because you're going to operate off different parts of the brain without training. And so the part of the brain that you're going to operate off of in a crisis, if you have no training, is probably the worst part of your brain. And so basically they call it the lizard brain, where now once the activation of the sympathetic nervous system starts, you now get into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. And that's the basic level instinctive ability of our brain to try to protect us. And so you don't know which one of those that you're going to use. You might run from that's really scary and not be aware of where you're at and run off a cliff. So the problem is those are not the best responses. So what we're trying to do is train to overcome those responses through training so that you control your process. And this is what a lot of people don't realize. What we're really trying to do is create a process in place that gives you a better likelihood for a good outcome. If I can place people in training and show them under crisis, you have, let's use an example that in this crisis, you have emergency procedures that need to be done. One could be close and lock my door and barricade it. And another emergency step could be that I need to call 911. Which one of those is the higher priority? And so a lot of times what people have to do is be placed under a little bit of stress in a controlled scenario so that they understand which one of those was more important. I did a class with a group of teachers in Texas after the Santa Fe, Texas incident. The governor actually started a program called the Guardians program, and teachers could be armed. So we wound up training them. And one of the things that they found out, we still trained them like what we would train any teacher to do, which was to close, lock, and barricade or lock, layer, reinforce their door. And we trained them in the 3 outs. When we did the full training, the scenario-based training on the last day of the week, one of the things that they found out was they said, well, which one should we do first? Should we try to use our weapon first or should we barricade the door? And I said, you're going to have to identify that. Well, I was the shooter. And one of the things that they found out very, very quickly was if they tried to get to the gun first, they usually couldn't get to stop me before I could get inside their door using a key. But when they barricaded the door and started putting layers in place, I had to basically, in order to really force the fight so that they could deploy the weapon, I had to defeat other things without breaking them. So they had to not, I couldn't allow them to use those things. But I can tell you one thing, when they put those things in place, the one comment that they told me at the end of the week was, we found out that the firearm for us is a last resort option. We don't need it when we did everything else you trained us to do. The point is, in those emergency situations, in that crisis, they had to determine what was the highest priority emergency task that needed to be performed and in what order. And that's what training does for you. It allows you to start clarifying what are the emergency tasks? When do I call 911? And what's it going to do for me as opposed to when do I get out of this area and completely then maybe out of the building or out of this hallway into another area that I can lock down. And so that's why we're using training, is to let them see and feel what it needs so that we activate that sympathetic nervous system, but they have to try to calm themselves in order to actually weigh out what those next steps are in that crisis. And lacking training, you're not going to do that. You're going to go back to your basic level instinctive response, which is fight, flight, or freeze. And I can tell you many times when I've surprised teachers or other people in these scenarios, they've stood at me holding a practice golf ball that they could throw and just stared at me. They've frozen, and then they looked at me and they said, because they've never been in that situation before. And literally, I have to kind of coach them through it. If I were you, I would fight. Now, once they start fighting, I reward that and move on and let them then go to another step. So lacking training, people don't know what the response is going to look like. Yes, it's scary. But yet some of these same people that complain about this Halloween will go to a haunted house in order to what? Be scared. That's kind of the approach that we try to take. It's more like a haunted house. Yes, it's going to be a little bit scary, but you're not going to get hurt. Follow our directions. We put safety measures in place, and we're going to try to crawl, walk, run through these instances of training.
Yeah, what you're sharing there about the purpose of being under stress in a controlled environment reminds me of the adage, better to sweat in training than to bleed in battle. It sounds like that's really the bottom line.
Well, we've been fortunate. We started out as a law enforcement military training company. We've trained over 150,000 people in 15 countries. But the one thing that makes us different as it relates to this particular topic was we did not develop our program, our model, based on what would a police officer do. We knew how to be a cop. We knew how, and we'd been training police to respond to these things. So it wasn't what would a police officer do in this. It was, if I was a teacher sitting at that desk when this happened, what would I need to know until the police get there? So that was the thought process that allowed us to develop the training on what they needed to know. And once you understand what someone needs to know, how are you going to teach it? And then understanding, yes, I'm a firm believer in force-on-force training for police officers, but teachers and other members are not in need of that. They don't need to feel pain in order to learn what we need them to know. And sometimes, as we're going to discuss, that's where some of these things go off the rails and things get bad. But stress is stress. So there's different levels of stress that we're using for people to have to learn to apply good decision making under that type of stress. So we try to control that in a very controlled manner so it doesn't get out of hand and somebody goes or has to endure something that they shouldn't have to do.
That's good. And the students are bringing enough pain for the teachers on a daily basis that you don't need to bring any. Just kidding. All students are wonderful.
Yeah, they'll tell you that too.
Mark, and also one thing I forgot, if you find this of value, please share it with others. We want to help as many people as we can and have as wide of a circle of influence as we can. Mark, we just talked about the need for a lack of a better term, healthy stress to be imposed in a controlled environment. But at what point is a line crossed where it becomes unhealthy? The example we shared at the beginning of the broadcast was, I believe, a rural district in Indiana last spring. The people that did the training, they used powered pellet guns and did a mock execution with allegedly stated, "We want you to know what this feels like when you hide and don't do anything." And so they shot him with the pellets, gave him welts, drew some blood. More importantly, they simply just felt traumatized, and it's probably something they'll never participate in again. So obviously that's out of bounds. Are there other training methods you've seen that push beyond the healthy and productive point? And obviously you don't do any of those things, but we should discuss them because they're prominent.
Right. It's been a fear of ours for quite a while. When, in 2008, we were awarded the contract with the state of Missouri, and many people don't realize Missouri was far ahead of about any other state in the union as it related to preparing schools for active shooter. Now, were we across the board prepared? No. But one of the things that was happening was that the state recognized that there are two groups that really need to be training together: local law enforcement and school faculty members. And that wasn't really occurring anywhere. So under this grant that we were awarded, we were training local police and school personnel together to respond to these types of incidents. And what it really did was it put the two groups in the room to have a discussion, because when the school's talking about going into lockdown and the police were looking at them going, well, how are we going to get in the building? It made them start communicating about, okay, we've got to look past what we're just going to do. What are you going to do, and how is that going to impact us? Well, when we developed our program based on that grant, some of the things that we were concerned about was we were getting a lot of great traction in dealing with schools and opening up schools to train with law enforcement, and we were seeing a lot of good things happening. But when Missouri passed Senate Bill 75 that mandated all schools in the state of Missouri had to, by mandate, perform at least one lockdown exercise per year, and it had to be conducted by a Missouri post-certified police officer, then we started hearing the problems coming out. And what was occurring was the school didn't want to pay for somebody to do it. They have limited funding. So what did they do? Had to be done by a Missouri post-certified police officer or other organization. They were calling their local police departments to come and run their drill. And what I saw over and over and over, when I would hear a police officer say, yeah, we're going to go train our school on active shooter, I thought, well, hey, that's great. What are you going to do? And they said, well, we're going to do an active shooter drill. We're going to come in and clear the building, and we're going to let them see what we do. Well, that completely does nothing for that school teacher that needs to know in that classroom, what do I need to do until you get here? So it was not really that crisis gap from the time of the shot going off until the police arriving, that crisis gap in that time, they were not teaching them anything on what they needed to do. And that was the failure that we saw over and over. Then the next thing that my fear was, and it happened on the other side of the state, in the state of Missouri, south of St. Louis, was just what happened in Indiana, where police were brought in to train teachers on how to respond to an active shooter. And what did they start doing? They started shooting them with force-on-force equipment, either simunitions or airsoft. And you had teachers hiding in a closet, calling the prosecuting attorney, saying, I'm being forced to participate in a drill that's causing me pain that I don't want to be a part of. And I knew at that point we were going to potentially lose everything that we had done, every headway that we had made was going to be lost because the people doing the training didn't know how to train the people they were responsible for. And that's when we developed our instructor course. We call it Active Shooter Intruder Response Train the Trainer, ASERT. And that's actually the Missouri law. When you look at it, that's what they refer to it as ASERT training. So when you look at what happened in Indiana, teachers and faculty and staff, they don't need to be shot to know what it's like to be a victim. When I read the article and I saw the news reports on that, there was that side of me that wanted to say, I wish there had been a teacher that had been properly trained that when they said, get on your knees and face the wall, would have grabbed a stapler and turned around and hit that police officer right in the head with it to fight him. I really did. I thought, it would have been justice. It would have been deserving, because what they were teaching them, well, granted, I get it. I know I understand in my mind what the officers thought they were doing was creating a mindset of prevailing. I'm not going to let this ever happen to me again. But the biggest fear for people that we train in this, what creates the anxiety, is they know that the problem exists, but no one ever gives them a solution. And so good training should be answering those questions and providing those people with a solution. And that is what's going to lower the overall anxiety as it relates to this issue. When people have a solution and an answer to the problem, they're not more stressed about the problem. They're more at peace with the problem because they know they can do things. And I'm going to tell you right now, having been a bad guy thousands of times against people that are properly trained, I don't want to go through one of those doors against a group of people that we have trained. I'm telling you right now, I don't care what kind of weapon I have. If they do what we've trained them to do, I don't want any part of it. I've had my head split open by a belt buckle. My partner Vaughn has had his head split open by a stapler and had 8 staples in the head, meat off the thumb and the edge of a door split his head open, and he had to have 8 staples. So when people do what they're trained to do, it's not a good fight. And that's one of the frustrating things in the articles that you and I kind of reviewed prior to this, Roy. You had people kind of laughing over the fact that one school armed their teachers with buckets of river rock. And they laughed and they said, a person's going to be stoned if they try and come into that school. Well, let me tell you, stoning still does go on in the world today, and people die as a result of a stoning. So let me tell you, as a bad guy, you go ahead and get whatever gun you want, and I'm going to force you to come through one opening. And there's 15 of us on the other side of that opening waiting for you with rocks about the size of the palm of our hand. And you think that we're not going to hurt you? Yeah, granted, 5 of us may miss, but those other 10 hit you in the head. What kind of damage is that going to do? So people have to understand that while they kind of flippantly laugh about some of the things that are being done to arm teachers and to prepare them to fight back, I can tell you how effective it can be. But the problem is when you have someone that's not been properly trained, and now we're going to train those personnel, sometimes we don't understand what they need to know. And that's where most of these problems have come from, where you're going to police officers that are not trained. Police are not security specialists. We're not trained to protect your property. We're trained to respond to deadly threats and to try to take a report now that your property's been taken. But we're not really trained specifically on how to tell you how to protect that. And that's sometimes the disconnect that happens. And while we do force-on-force training for police, it's a necessity for them. They are going to be engaged in a gunfight. That teacher doesn't need to get shot to find out what it's like to get shot.
Mark, while we're talking about the importance of trainers being trained, if you're on the school side or really any side, the church side, the business side, what are just a few things that you should keep in mind as you're evaluating a potential trainer? We talked a little bit beforehand that anybody can come forward these days and, say they're a trainer.
Right. Well, I can tell you right now, personally for us, one of our mantras at Strategos is basically, just that capability breeds humility. Humility cannot be overstated, because humility in an instructor also means lack of ego. And I'm going to tell you, as a law enforcement trainer, and I've been a full-time trainer since 2002, training police officers that have an ego, I honestly will spend the first couple of days of a 5-day course beating the ego out of them in order to get them to adapt or just openly look at what we're proposing to them and let them try it. And then they, at the end of the week, have to decide what's going to work for them. So one of the first things that we look at is anyone that comes through Strategos, can you be a good student? If you can be a good student, that means you've removed your ego, you're willing to be open-minded and try new things, and then analyze it and determine what's going to work and what's not. So for us, a lack of ego or humility is one of the first things I'm going to look for in an instructor. And the reason also that that's important is so many times when somebody has an ego, they want to set people up for failure. Because, see, if I can set you up for failure, I feel better about myself. But yet, what am I there to try and train you to do? I want to train you for success, especially when we're talking about life-saving skills. And so that's why that is so important about removing that ego from people so that they have that true understanding. They're there for the right reasons. As it relates then from there, one, know who you're going to be in front of. Many times, taking a police officer and putting him in front of teachers or other clients can sometimes be a bad mix. I had some police officers that I had trained that they had to do training for a church group. And I had trained these specific police officers. Well, they had to bring another police officer with them that was one of their trainers. And right off the bat, this trainer that they had to bring in starts dropping the F-bomb in the church. And this little old lady on the front row, they told me she almost just passed out. Well, again, know your audience. Who am I talking to? What's normal? What's not? So for us at Strategos, our rule is you don't ever cuss in front of a student. There's no reason for it. Those are filler words. So again, though, that's where that ego gets in the way and not understanding who your client is or who your audience is. In my 5-day class, I have a block of instruction for ASER, Active Shooter Intruder Response Train the Trainer, for school teachers. So you want to teach teachers. And I talk about this stuff, humility, know your audience, no cussing, no war stories, unless it has a proven tie to the point you're trying to make. So sometimes we get in there to kind of bolster ourselves, and it's taking away from that training time that they really need to do that. I saw Dave Appel just had a question about what about church trainers, and it's very much the same. Training the people for church security. We try to look at it that same way. Capability breeds humility. So the question was, are we going to have a train the trainer for church security? We have started doing a class. We're kind of getting off topic, but just real quick, Roy, on that is we have what we call now our church champions program. And that is taking a trainer and taking them specifically for 2 days, one-on-one with us, so that we take them further in their knowledge base to be able to go back to their churches and actually provide further training. So that's something that we're kind of working on right now.
Excellent. Thanks for the comments and questions. Thank you, Dave. And Strategos is continually rolling out new curriculum and new instruction. That's what they do. So as the needs arise, they're there if they're not already ahead of the curve. Mark, let's tackle the question that was most significant to me, and that is some of these reports claim there's no evidence that school active shooter training works.
Yeah, there's no evidence. One, I would say, well, who's responsible for collecting and asking the right questions? As a kind of an offside of another way of looking at this, Roy, I teach low light. So I teach police officers how to fight in the dark using a flashlight. And the reality is, when I ask those police officers in class, how many of you have been properly trained how to use a light? Well, I shoot with a flashlight, but I don't search with the light. And the reality is, most of the time you're searching with a flashlight. It's different than you're fighting with the light versus shooting with the light. But now let's say you have an officer involved shooting. The detective investigating that case may not truly understand whether lighting played a contributing factor in that or not. And so does he ask the right questions? This is the same type of thing. One of the things that really kind of makes, again, the way that we look at things differently is because of the perspectives that we always try to view every case from. I don't look at one of these incidents and say, well, police responded, we did everything right, there's nothing more we can do, right? We've been training police to respond to these things from 1999 after Columbine, and yet we're still seeing the suspects have great success. So we're training the police. Do we stop training the police because it's not working? The police response has only gotten better. And in fact, Virginia Tech, we use it as an example. You had 2 SWAT teams on scene in 2 minutes where we set the record for the best possible police response you could have to a school shooting in the United States. And the suspect still set the record for the most killed in a school shooting in the United States. So should we stop training police? The reality is, I can tell you, we have had an incident here locally with a school district that we trained, and the homicide occurred right outside their primary door, entrance door. And when it happened, all of those teachers responded. And I can tell you, those teachers called us and said, it was just like you trained us. We knew exactly what we needed to do. We knew what we needed to do to keep our kids safe, how to lock our doors, how to lock, layer, reinforce, and barricade our doors. Nobody else was injured. So people can say that, and that to me, why in the world would you ever say we're not going to do that? It's kind of like saying, well, we've built the building not to burn. We've got sprinkler systems, we've got fire alarms, we've got warnings, we've got exits signs lit. There's no reason for us to do fire drills anymore. Yet we've not had a kid killed as a result of a fire in a school in over 50 years. But yet now we're doing active shooter drills, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to mitigate the number of people killed or injured as a result of these problems. While prevention, you cannot, preparation doesn't equal prevention. We can prepare for these things, but they still can happen. But what we do is we mitigate how bad they are. And that's what training does. So for these, I'm just going to say bluntly, these idiots that say those types of things, they don't know what they're talking about. And I would venture to say, when it comes to a crisis, what training do they have that their opinion really counts? Do they understand that in a crisis where we're talking about seconds and what you do in a second, as opposed to, hey, when are you going to be here? I'll be there in 10 or 15 minutes. In everyday life, it really doesn't matter. So these people that are piping in on some of this stuff but don't understand truly what a response in a crisis means, that's very, very frustrating to me, because we would be going backwards. In fact, we're fighting to get more time to increase the level of training. Look, if we increase our level of training, we're better at prevention. Prevention is always better than response. Because it raises our level of awareness, we start understanding what are the behavioral indicators that we're looking for in people that are more prone to maybe commit these types of acts. And then once we understand it, we can actually intervene and bring this person into some assistance that they need to get them the help to become a more productive member of society instead of going down the path that they were going. But these people want to go completely backwards and say, well, it's scaring people, we don't need to do this. Or we're just going to ban all guns and this will never happen again. There's no one single solution to these types of things. But I can tell you, the money spent on adding more cameras to your school does not make your school safer. It makes you feel safer, but it doesn't make you safer. Training personnel is the best money you could ever spend on a security system that you would have in place. The human being trained to understand and look for these types of problems is better than anything.
Well, that's an excellent response to this idea that there's no evidence that training makes a difference. And it is a rather bold claim, as you point out. And it would require an incredible amount of data and data scientists to be able to make such an generalized statement. So excellent point. Want to acknowledge a couple things as we're winding down here. One of the key points that you made, Mark, was you were talking about humility. That like the care, like when you're looking to hire a trainer, someone to come into your school and provide a sensitive training on a sensitive topic, that really humility's a starter. We want to thank Julie Dahlberg. She said humility is the first thing you notice with Strategos instructors, and that's not common with everyone. So we appreciate the kind word.
Thank you, Julie. Yes, thank you. And kind of building on that too, Roy, one of the things too with humility, when you start doing scenarios, let's say kind of backing up a little bit with teachers, when we're actually doing those scenarios, we do that in a crawl, walk, run fashion. The first one is designed to where they only get to hide, and it's to kind of just put them in that mindset of what we used to do, which was just close, lock doors, turn the lights off, move to the safe area of the room, and take roll call, and essentially just hide. And the problem with that is simply, it's not a solution, it's a hope. And so when we come into the room and you have a paint gun just making noise, we're not shooting anyone, we're giving the noise to indicate what could have happened. But when you see someone that's completely breaking down, they're crying and everything else, I train our instructors at that point, you stop, you come out of roll, and you let them know, listen, hey, this is only training, this is only an exercise. I'm going to leave the room, and you delegate somebody that's there with them to make sure that person is okay. So there's got to be empathy there as well. As an instructor, you have to understand, am I pushing them beyond the point that they're capable of handling right now? And without humility and empathy, these instructors are not going to realize that, and they would push past that, and now we're creating trauma in somebody that doesn't need that. And so that's why so many of those things come together, that there's got to be a program in place that truly trains the instructor on what to look for and how to present it, and then how to carry it out. And my fear is, and again, I'm not going to name names or anything else, but people have to understand that most of the programs and the articles that you and I use to prepare for this, when you start pulling stuff down and you see the training companies involved, and really there's only about 4 or 5 nationally known training companies that teach this type of stuff, and we're one of them. But you're talking either a 2-day instructor certification course, a 1-day instructor certification, or a 4-hour online instructor certification course? What's the quality of instructor that you're putting out there? When Vaughn and I developed our program, I would not budge from the idea that it's going to be 5 days. I'm going to create a subject matter expert that can go back to their organization and debate this topic and know how to do it properly. And so for us, it's 5 days, and I'm not going to come down from that. At least I don't plan on it unless I can justify it in some form or fashion. But right now, it's a 5-day program, and I have no intent to change that.
Right. No one's going to say, gosh, I wish you wouldn't have been so thorough in teaching me how to protect, our students.
Well, and here's the reality. We're talking about these people going back and being responsible for training people for life-saving tactics and techniques. And I can't do that in 4 hours and do it with a sense of accomplishment that I know that they're capable of doing that. When I lay my head down on the pillow and I know that I trained somebody, I want to know that I gave them all I could. Granted, if I could, I'd do it in 2 weeks. But you have to find that balance. And for us, it's 5 days to get the right mix of background information, the understanding of who you're talking to and how it's going to be done, training them in the program, and the techniques that are needed to be able to do what they need to do, and then testing them. The last day of our 5-day course is all test. They have to test in front of a Strategos instructor to demonstrate that they have the ability to go out and do what we want them to do in order to represent us, but more importantly, to save lives.
Excellent point. So, as I look back, it's important that we don't let a few bad apples spoil the whole bunch, or a few outliers who behave badly in training ruin the entire concept of school active shooter training. And just like with any industry, you have the pastor who runs off with his secretary. So we don't just say, well, they're all corrupt. We realize you have to do your research, spend some time, and pick the trainer that's best for you. Our last question, if we were to cancel all active shooter school training, what would we replace it with? What it seems to me is that there's hints that we can just replace it all with technology. You mentioned cameras, for example. Is there some alternative that would work?
Right. No, I not that I can see, Roy, to be honest. The reality is technology really is it's only a component. It's a part of the layer. It's literally awareness is the first part of everything. There's kind of a Chinese proverb that basically says awareness is the first lesson in any self-defense, right? Because if you can avoid the fight and never get in it, you're always better off. That you win every one of those you never got into. So when it comes to technology, there's some great technology out there, but in and of itself, it's not going to solve this problem, and it can't respond to it. And here's the reason. When you start talking about security, a bad guy, a human being looking to create harm to people, is looking for ways to circumvent your security. And let's use the incident in California. The suspect in the music festival actually went and he cut the fence. That fence was a layer, right? That fence is a security measure. So what did he do? Rather than go through the gate where everyone else did, he cut the fence and created a hole and came through it. So that fence is no different than a camera, than an open door alarm system, any number of technology components that you want to put out there. They are only just a piece. And the most crucial piece in all of this is the human being. And when we're talking about saving lives, there's no way around it. You cannot, and I say it another way, Roy, I can't care more about your safety and security than you do. The meaning of that is simply, I can do everything I can to keep you safe, but I can't be with you 24/7, 365 to make sure that you're never in jeopardy. So it starts with you. And each one of us has to understand that. Nobody can care more than I do about my security. My family's the same way. I have to train my daughter to be her first level of security. with that. Tim Peterson, he asked, he posted it right there. Is there someone in your life today worth living for? And if you can't answer it that way, answer it this way: is there someone in your life today worth dying for? In other words, if my daughter was with me right now and somebody came in this building, would I do everything in my power and be willing to give my life to save hers? Yes, no doubt about it. That's the mindset that we have to start with. And that's a tough question. There's a lot of people that can't answer that. But generally, most, especially, and not to point out one over the other, most women will answer it the other way. Is there someone in my life worth living for? I will do whatever it takes to get home to my child today. So security measures are part of it, but they will never take the place of training the person. There's just no way around it. There's nothing that you can put in place technology-wise that will not fail us. I can tell you incidents of SWAT teams deploying flashbangs that didn't go off. Well, that's an important part of their plan. We're going to deploy a flashbang before we go into that door. Well, now it doesn't go off. You just lost one component of what you needed for that entry to be successful or possibly successful. So now what do I do? Right? So technology will fail us. There's no ifs or ands or buts. I mean, think about our phones. They fail us. You're making a phone call and it's that important phone call, and all of a sudden you lose service. It failed you. So technology will fail us. The only thing that won't is you, the human being, properly trained in what to do for you in that second in time. Not a minute, not 5 minutes, that 1 second in time. What you do right now is going to matter the most.
Bravo, Mark. Excellent thoughts. And we appreciate everyone who's watching either live or watching it later on. We would value it, appreciate it if you share it with a friend, somebody else. And if you run across somebody who says, "Oh, we don't need school active shooter training for schools," point him to this video. Let him hear what Mark has to say. And if you want to talk more with Mark, you can reach him at the email address on your screen, mark@strategosintl.com. Explore this topic, explore training for yourself. We certainly appreciate it. Mark, any final words here?
We say it in pretty much all of our classes. We thank you for taking the time to join us. Honestly, we hope it was a total waste of your time and that you never need any of the things that we discussed. But the reality is, in this world today, you have to be prepared. It's not difficult. There's not a lot that you have to do to just be better prepared. Let us help you with that. If you've got any questions, please reach out to us. But thank you for taking the time to join us today.